And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Weather for tonight, rain and showers continuing here over the southern southeast part of the state, and the only significant storm out here over the Aleutians, spreading some wind and rain in toward Atka Island, extending westward. And for tomorrow, the system continues to slide eastward, but not reaching the eastern Aleutians yet. Bering Sea, pretty nice and quiet under high pressure. It's centered here along the southwest coast. Partly sunny, afternoon showers, isolated thunderstorms in the interior again. Pretty dry for the panhandle. Friday, much warmer temperatures here over the Copper River Basin, south central Alaska. And not too bad even in the upper Tanana Valley. Afternoon showers, isolated thunderstorms, mostly over the mountainous terrain there. And not too bad for the southeast coast as well. Chance of showers in the north and a slight chance of showers down to the south as this system kicks off to the east. Coastal water forecast, south coast of the coastline there. East winds at 10 knots, northeast at 10 on the central coast, and west-northwest at 10 knots on the north coast. Lynn Canal Glacier Bay Stevens Passage, variable winds at 10 knots, and Clarence Strait southeast of 15. And then for the day Friday, northwest winds 15 knots here out along the coast. And for the inside waters, variable winds at 10 knots with seas at 2 feet. Prince William Sound, variable winds 10 knots, North Gulf Coast, variable winds 10 to 15 knots. Kamishak Bay and the Barren Islands, variable winds 10 to 15 knots, and Cook Inlet, south to southwest breeze at 15 knots. And for Friday, west-northwest winds 10 to 15 knots for Cook Inlet, Kamishak Bay northwest at 15. Strongest winds will occur here for the Barren Islands, where small craft advisories are in the forecast for northwest winds at 25 knots. Light variable winds for the western North Gulf Coast, and variable at 15 for the east side there in Prince William Sound. Southwest wind 15 knots, seas 2 feet. Kodiak Island, variable winds 10 to 15 knots for the day Thursday. Variable winds 10 to 15 knots for the Alaska Peninsula. And Bristol Bay, variable winds at 10 knots. Friday, southeast winds 15 knots for the Alaska Peninsula. Bristol Bay west at 15 knots. And we'll kick the winds up to 20 knots out of the west across Kodiak Island. Eastern Aleutians, east to southeast winds 20 to 30 knots tomorrow. And east winds at 30 knots for Adak and Atka. And east-northeast winds 25 to 30 knots for the western Aleutians. And for Friday, western Aleutians, east to northeast winds 15 to 20 knots. And good small craft advisories for Adak and Atka for east winds at 30 knots, and the eastern Aleutians, east winds 30 to 35 knots. And for the southwest coast tomorrow, south of Nunivak Island, west winds at 10 knots, seas 1 feet. Southeast 15 here for the Pribilof Islands, turning south at 15 for St. Matthew Island. Yukon Delta coast, St. Lawrence Island, same thing. South winds 15 knots, seas 3 feet. And then for Friday, light variable winds up here over the northern Bering Sea into Norton Sound, northwest at 10 knots there, south of Nunivak Island. East winds 20 knots for the Pribilofs, otherwise southeast of 15 for St. Matthew Island. And for the central and eastern Beaufort Sea coast, winds out of the east tomorrow at 20 to 25 knots. And for the western Arctic coast, east winds 15 knots and south winds 10 to 15 knots for the Chukchi Sea. And then for Friday, eastern Beaufort Sea coast, east winds of 15 knots, southeast 15 for the central coast, and light winds on the western Arctic coast, east at 5 knots, and for the Chukchi Sea, south winds 15 to 20 knots.